Good afternoon. So it's a random Wednesday afternoon, and so why not talk about God? I am playing the YouTube algorithm roulette, and it presented Rainn Wilson, who's the actor Dwight Schrute from The Office, which I love that series, talking about God. So I'm like very intrigued, and I'm like, all right, let's listen to it, and mine as well. Live react while we are doing it. Obviously, God is a very fascinating subject to talk about. Hopefully, we can do so in a manner that is exploratory, fluid, and peaceful. So, let us check out the video that caught my eye, and then we can do a deeper dive into that.
I don't know. You tell me, man. I don't know. Oh, did I write that? Yeah, it's
Okay.
I have a chapter in the book called The Notorious God. Um, and I love this conversation. I love a conversation about God. I don't love an old-fashioned YouTube debate about whether God exists or
Yeah,
not.
you kind of open the chapter by talking about how useless and fruitless YouTube religion debates are.
Yes. It's
I wasn't going to mention that. But.
Well, I know I think it used to be your bread and butter, but I greatly admire how you've expanded your vision to just have just big, meaty, beautiful conversations. And
so I've heard that actually the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. So we can definitely discuss that, what that means. It's interesting. He said that he doesn't know. You tell me. Maybe that's a Zen-like response. And then they talk about YouTube debates about God. And I think, that's kind of just like oh, I haven't seen it and you haven't seen it, or I'm a scientist and you're a guru, right? Like, and it's like people coming in from different oppositions of mindsets, and how those debates tend not to go nowhere. Like I've definitely watched a lot of those and have always kind of ended up regretting watching them because it was never like a thoughtful exploration. It was just kind of one person saying their side and the other person saying their side.
Challenging conversations too, as one should, and I feel challenge me as well. But just having Richard Dawkins versus some priest and them fighting it out. And, there's a lot of kind of angry 23-year-olds at home going, oh, you landed a good point there. Oh yeah, you got him, Dawkins. It's kind of like Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
And it doesn't really change the atmosphere. But I do think, so the finger pointing at the moon. So
I think people often confuse.
Oh, interrupted.
So when I read that in your book, I thought of this. I keep quoting this poem by C.S. Lewis, and there's a point where he says, "Thoughts are but coins. Let me not trust instead of thee, their thin-worn image of thy head." It's like people often worship their thoughts more than they worship the thing that their thoughts are supposed to be directed to, and so you end up with these ideas of God and these pictures in your head. And
isn't it Wittgenstein who talks about the fishbowl? I don't have the quote right on the tip of my fingers. It's something about like how fly glass were caught, like flies caught in a glass, and the glass is the limitations of our language to be able to summate stuff that is, beyond
language.
Beyond. Yeah. And we're stuck like flies popping around in this fly glass because our language is so limited to try and encapsulate something that is kind of beyond our current consciousness' understanding.
It's impossible to comprehend just how much our language restricts our thinking. I only speak one language fluently, semi-fluently, I like to think. I think it was Goethe who said of language, "He who knows one knows none." Because without this comparison, it's difficult to even recognize the constraints that you have in your language. I did a podcast recently with a guy who's got a channel called Magnify, and he was talking about how the English language, for example, is embedded with sort of accounting terms. It's very sort of trade based because that was the society that this language evolves in. And so when you apply it to religion, it's Jesus accounting, for sins, and we're in spiritual debt. And these kinds of language.
Oh, interesting.
Look at the way that religious language is completely embedded into the Arabic language. Totally
understandable.
And the original,
I think language is, yeah, it's limiting in a way, but it's also like language taking at face value can be limiting. What I like about language is it can be used in a way that where you say like read between the lines, and it can be used in a poetic way, and you can arrange words in a way that, like I think to that guy's point, that aren't necessarily rooted in accounting, right? But more in an artistic flair. But yeah, I mean, language is definitely a restriction when it comes to talking about God. But I don't. I think language is pretty apt for talking about most things.
Original word for sin. Sin was an ancient Greek term of archery. Did you know this?
Oh, like missing.
So sin is missing the mark.
Missing the mark.
Yeah, like you're doing this and like, oh, I sinned. I didn't hit the bullseye. So sin isn't like this black mark on your soul that's going to damn you to hell for eternity. It's you missed the mark. And guess what? That's what we do all the time as human beings, is we miss the mark. But again, and then that language got translated. When it got translated into Latin or whatever it was, it got translated kind of misappropriated.
Yeah, as so often happens. I think the history of translation, especially in religion, is something that needs a bit more focus, because so much of our understanding of theology can be affected by one person's decision to make. Have you ever seen paintings of Moses with horns?
No.
A lot of the time, if you see a painting of, so Michelangelo's famous statue Moses has horns on it.
Whoa.
If you go to the Saint-Hel in Paris, you see on the windows there are pictures of Moses with horns on.
Wow.
And it's because there's this word, I think it's keren, in Hebrew, which can be translated as like rays, as in like rays of light, but it can also be translated as horns. It's like the same word. And so when St. Jerome makes the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Bible, he translates it literally as horns. So there's this passage in Exodus where Moses comes down from the mountain, and he did not know that his head was keren because he'd been speaking with the Lord. So he did not know that his face shone, is how most translations will have it. But Jerome translates it as he did not know that his face was horned because he'd been speaking with the Lord, which doesn't make much sense, because like 5 minutes later, he has to cover up his face because of the effect it's having on people around him. It's quite clear that that's what it meant. But because Jerome translated it as horns on your you end up seeing all this religious art with
that's fascinating.
Moses having these devilish looking horns.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's quite a sort of trivial example, but you can imagine that happening theologically. It's not just like the painting of Moses, but your conception of God is completely altered by the fact that some concept has been translated wrong. And sin is a great example of that. I mean, shifting your perspective on sin from being this punch that you've landed on God, or this wrong that you've committed that you can sort of do an evil giggle and it's God who's kind of upset about it, to rather being it's you missing the mark for yourself, can transform the way that you interact with the world.
Yeah, words are definitely a double-edged sword. They can help us understand a lot, but they can also, when misrepresented or mistranslated, they can shut out true meaning.
Yeah.
Just by that one word, I think.
Yeah. There's one of my favorite stories from the Baha'i faith is the son of the founder, Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha. He came to the United States a little over 100 years ago and toured around for about a year. And when he landed, and he was on the front page of the papers, like the Persian prophet has landed, and they have pictures of him. He's got a big beard and a turban and stuff like that. And this journalist said, Abdul Baha, do Baha'is believe in Satan? And Abdul Baha thought about it. And Abdul Baha was like, yes. And they said, oh, how do Baha'is view Satan? And Abdul Baha said, Satan is the insistent self. And I love that so much, because obviously Baha'is don't believe that there's a red devil man with scales and a pitchfork in an evil place, like trying to tempt us. But when you think about the insistent self, and you think about the universality of religious faith and religious belief, the ego and the allure of the ego, of lust and passion and power, is hardwired into our DNA, as well it should be, because we are part ape, we're part, we're part animal, maybe we're mostly animal, and that's how that's how we survived, was to have our own self-interest, to spread our seed, to seek power, protect ourselves. But that is the ego. That is so much of what Buddhism is about the need, the clutching, the need to possess, that this is a source of great unhappiness. So this idea that Satan is not something outside of ourselves, but something in ourselves, and it's not an evil power, but in fact, something that we all wrestle with.
Nice.
Speaks to every spiritual tradition.
Who was it? Baha'u'llah's
Abdul-Baha.
Abdul-Baha. There's a quote from Abdul-Baha in your book.
Okay.
Page 98 for those following along at home. People have pictured a god in the realm of their mind, and worship that image which they have made for themselves. Consider then how all the peoples of the world are bowing the knee to a fancy of their own contriving, how they have created a creator within their own minds, and they call it the fashioner of all that is. It's people worshipping their thoughts rather than worshipping the thing that their thoughts are supposed to point to.
Yeah.
I think that, so Thomas Aquinas famously thought that all religious language was analogy. And so God is not powerful. God is not knowing. God is not, any of these things, because these are human concepts that we use to sort of analogously think about the way that God kind of operates. But he's obviously not powerful in the way that a human is powerful, being able to lift heavy things and influence people and stuff like that. It's a totally incomprehensible notion that we use these analogous terms. But now, if you ask the philosophers even, how do you define God? They'll say, oh, he's an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing. And perhaps
that's the finger pointing at the moon.
Yeah, pointing at the thinking about the finger, the pointing at the finger itself, which is probably the wrong way of thinking about it. I think a lot of David Bentley Hart seems like someone that you've read.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure that one of his biggest critiques of the new atheism movement is that they're just thinking of the wrong kind of God. They've just got the wrong picture of what God is supposed to be. I mean, what do you think God is supposed to be?
Here we go.
Well, that's the ultimate question, isn't it? Well, yeah, because you could go even further than that, and you can say that to exist is a quality of the physical world. This pen exists. Does God exist? Does God have the same quality that this pen has?
Right.
You can't say that God exists. But again, that's how trapped we are by language.
By language, yeah.
So, yeah, I love David Bentley Hart. The Experience of God. His book is a seminal book for me, and that really illumined a new way of thinking about God. And I have a chapter in there I referenced before, the Notorious God, and I'm actually doing a documentary. I'm going to start next year doing a documentary called The Notorious God. I'd love to interview you for it.
Sounds
great. Are you up for that?
That sounds like great fun.
Okay. But this idea that God is much closer to an experience than a being with superpowers.
Yeah.
So Jesus said God is love. And the hippies were right in a way. Like, can God be closer to something more akin to music than to a dude? David Bentley Hart calls him like a demiurge. That's this old idea of like a god with superpowers on a cloud, like striking you and giving you favors and like and having opinions and whatnot. Can God be closer to physics and beauty than to any kind of being? That's what so many people are striving to understand through psychedelics. I'm not a huge fan, but I'm also an addict, so I can't do them. So maybe if I wasn't, I'd enjoy them. Who knows? But that reaching for something beyond, again, that reaching for something transcendent. And when I experience God the most, I experience God in nature. I experience God. I think the closest I've ever come to God was at a Radiohead concert. And I saw Radiohead at the Hollywood Bowl, and song after song after song in Rainbows came up. And I was just like, my face was melting and I felt one with the world, and I just felt love and ebullience and joy. And I was just absolutely
frequency,
mesmerized and transformed. And I was like, this is this is like the most religious experience I've ever had.
Okay, great. I was going to pause it. I mean, what he was describing there, I think I would describe it as like the dissolved self, like, like essentially you're listening to music, so you're just vibing on that frequency and you're no longer like in your thoughts, you're not in your head. But a lot that, Rainn Wilson touches on there. Too bad they never really got to finish that point about the finger pointing to the moon, but we can discuss that. I want to get back to one point that he mentioned.
Religious language was analogy. And so finger itself, which is probably the wrong way of thinking about it. I think a lot of David Bentley Hart seems like someone that you've read.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure that one of his biggest critiques of the new atheism movement is that they're just thinking of the wrong kind of God. They've just got the wrong picture of what God is supposed to be. I mean, what do you think God is supposed to be?
Well, that's the ultimate question, isn't it? Well, yeah, because you could go even further than that, and you can say that to exist is a quality of the physical world.
There we go. Okay, so yeah, that existence being a quality of the physical world, and he's like, this pen exists, this God exists in the same way that this pen does. Really fascinating conversation there. I'm glad that the YouTube algorithm presented that. Since they never talked about the finger pointing to the moon, let's just start there. This guy has obviously read a lot of Eckhart Tolle recently, and not just Tolle, he's talking about that guy from 100 years ago. A lot of these spiritual teachers, people who have kind of experienced this transcendent thing that we call God, all say the same thing, and the vast majority of all of it pulls from the ancient cultures, obviously the Eastern cultures, and a lot of those same words get reused and the phrases get repeated. Finger pointing to the moon is one of these, and what it means is the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. And the reason that he started talking about language right after that is because language operates in the same way. They were talking about the limitations of languages and how languages can be a double-edged sword. It can help describe something, but it can also steer you the wrong way and just basically kill the definition of something, completely transform it and hide it. So that's because language is, in this example, like the finger, right? And the moon is the subject that the language is trying to denote, describe. And the difference is the finger is not the moon. So language can be used to point to God, but ultimately language is not God. And language is about as good as we can get, right? Because language, accompanies our thoughts. We think in language. So language and thinking, I often, equate those. And thinking, just like language, so thoughts, just like language, at best can only point to it, but are not it. So one thing that, they kind of alluded to here, but they never quite got there, is what that means. What that tells me is that you have to go beyond the thinking apparatus, beyond the description apparatus, beyond the mind. You have to go beyond the mind in order to understand what this is. And Dwight from The Office, or Rainn Wilson, touched on it there, and he kind of got it with the experience line that he said. So let's get into the useless debate, no change. Yeah, and again, because these debates happen with thought and language, right? I mean, that's the essence of these debates, is like, let's go thought and language back and forth. And once again, you're never going to get there using that channel. You have to go into the experience realm. I like his, sin, missing the mark. Um, Again, a simple mistranslation like that changes the history of culture, right? Of society and the world. Like, all of a sudden you've got billions of people, in the Catholic or Christian religion, who view sin as like an original guilt that they have, an original wrong that they possess, like a burden, and something that God comes and removes from them, when in fact, the accurate translation is simply missing the mark. And I translate, I believe that to me sounds like missing the mark is missing the point, which is, again, mistaking the finger for the moon, mistaking the thoughts for the thing you're describing, and failing to go beyond the mind in order to really sit in and experience what God is. The devil. So the insistent self, I think that's a fabulous way to describe, what the devil is. And again, that the mind, that apparatus that keeps you from God, essentially, by putting, by making it think it's words and thoughts, substitutes its knowing of the world and of yourself with an idea of yourself and an idea of the world. And that's what, Rainn describes as the ego self. Okay. And that ego self, which in this terms, what he means is ego has a lot of meanings. In this context, ego means the unconscious self. So the unaware self, that self that is contained only in the mind and doesn't go beyond that, right? It doesn't go into experience. It's stuck in description. And that part of the mind, and we can discuss this in other videos, but that part of that ego self, one of the characteristics is just constant dissatisfaction, right? Because it constantly needs to be, it's so insecure, it constantly needs to be reinforcing itself and revalidating its existence, and it does so through this endless game of thoughts and words. And so that incessant self, like, I need to keep redefining who Hugo is, and re-justifying me, and I'm really concerned, that I may go away, or I may not be valid. What does that person think? What does that person think? What do I think? And just always self-conscious, and always just an incessant self. And that is like the devil, right? Because that ultimately is that's the barrier. That's the one thing that's for sure going to keep you from experiencing what God is. And that's really the only way you can know what God is through experience. But if you're stuck in your head all the time, you're gonna talk your way out of that experience every single time. Okay, so the main point, and the one, like the big enchilada, like when I was like, whoa, was when Rainn brought up existence. Like, maybe, like, why do we have to even have a word for God? Like, I don't even know if it's applicable. Maybe God is just not existence. Maybe existence just pertains to this physical dimension, this physical form that we're in. And that's true. And here's where language actually can help us. Like, here's what I would say to them, is to use the word essence. So God is the essence before the existence. So the life force that we are an embodiment of, we are like the body, this existence, this physical thing is what exists in this physical dimension, is more like a vehicle of the life force, of the essence that animates us, right? That gives life to everything all around the universe. That essence before existence is how you can kind of start to wrap your mind around this transcendent thing, which is ultimately near impossible to comprehend only using the mind. Like, you have to really, really meditate and really fall into it and experience it. So Jesus says God is love. And he asked, why do we have to personify it more than that? And that's a good point. Here's where we're going to connect 2 points here. The devil, the incessant self, has to. It's the only way. It's the only way it can still exist. Is ultimately the big thing. God needs to somehow connect to me. So like, I've in some way, and that's the irony that the podcast host was pointing to, is like, we create this concept of God, and then we say that God created us, because that incessant self has to tie itself to God in this way. And what it does is it limits what God actually is, because God isn't, it avoids description. It transcends that. The transcendent is transcendent. And that's a point that we really need to take to heart. And it exists in essence form prior to existence. Okay. And he talks about it, it's like, when I was at a Radiohead concert, I was just, he was just a beating heart, right? He was just pounding energy, right? Resonating with the energy that being emitted, from the musicians. No mind, no self, no incessant self, no ideas about nothing, just pure existence, pure essence. That's what God is. I have a song that I made called God Is, that, again, I believe music is a better vehicle to get us closer to understanding what God is. Let's see. Let's do, because I never heard of this guy. This is just a YouTube roulette thing, and this guy has a video called "I Tried Being an Atheist." Oh no, this is why I don't believe in God. Let's just listen to a little bit of it and kind of see where he's going, and then we can maybe start to wrap it up and hear that song.
You are there. Verse 7 onwards reads, where can I go from your presence? Or where can I flee from your spirit? If I ascend to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths of the Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall guide me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. This poem in its entirety is given by the NRSV a title, The Inescapable God. It's a message of bold reassurance to the believer, reminding them that since God is present everywhere, pervading every inch of our universe, he is, in the happiest sense possible, inescapable. But my first argument, and it's going to be the first of three, against the viability of theism, flows from the demonstrable fact that this divine consolation is seemingly not offered universally, and often, in fact, restricted from those who want it the most. I'm going to be making the claim specifically that atheism or naturalism provides a better account for three facts of our universe. The first being the hiddenness of God. The second being the geographical, statistical arrangement, shall we say, of religious belief. And the third will be the problem of gratuitous suffering. And we'll see if we get time to finish it off. Far from being unable to escape God, there is a very real contingent of non-believers, and I would count myself among their number, who are unable by any means to discover him, who seek and do not find, who knock and receive, as it were, no answer. This strange phenomenon is known as the problem of divine hiddenness. If there is a God, then simply, why is he hidden from so many of us so much of the time? If theism is to offer a sufficient account of reality, then it must offer an account of what J.L. Schellenberg has famously labeled non-resistant non-belief, which he distinguishes from resistant non-belief. It's sometimes said by a theist who wishes to explain the problem of divine hiddenness that people simply disbelieve through their own fault. They're too stubborn. They're purposefully blinding themselves to the evidence because they don't want it to be true. They're not approaching the arguments honestly with an open heart, and that if they would only do this, then God would surely reveal himself. Such a person would be what Schellenberg calls a resistant non-believer. He disbelieves in some sense because he actively resists it. For what it's worth, I do think that such people exist. I think many such people exist. There are people who come to this debate with their minds already made up. There are people who want it not to be true,
Talks
that
really fast.
God exists, and in fact wouldn't submit to that truth even if it were true. There was a recent poll run by the Atheist Experience YouTube channel, which I know, Jonathan, you're a fan of, which asked, if there was a God, would you worship it? To which an astonishing 85% of respondents said that they would not. There are, however, also people who disbelieve in God, not out of resistance or stubbornness or a hardened heart, but rather due to sheer lack of conviction. Indeed, many such people actively want to be convinced of God's existence and would jump at the chance of entering into a relationship with him if they thought that he did. But no matter how hard they search, they simply find no answer forthcoming from the heavens. And this is the non-resistant non-believer. Formally, then, Schellenberg's problem of divine hiddenness can be stated as follows. Premise 1, if there is a God, he is perfectly loving, something I'm pretty sure Jonathan agrees with. Premise 2, if a perfectly loving God exists, non-resistant non-belief does not occur. Premise 3, non-resistant non-belief does occur. 4, therefore, no perfectly loving God exists. And the conclusion from the first premise is that therefore there is no God. A loving God, like the Christian God, would surely not refuse any willing person from developing a relationship with him. And so if somebody is truly non-resistant and open to receiving God's grace, we should expect them to receive it. Thus, Schellenberg's assertion that if God exists, then non-resistant non-belief does not exist. The question, then, is there such a thing as non-resistant non-belief, a non-resistant non-believer? To which all I can really say is nice to meet you. The last time I debated Jonathan a number of years ago, when I was just a few months out of being a teenager, I said that even if I found Christianity to be true, I still wouldn't want to worship the God that it promotes. I now, since then, have realized how irrational and self-defeating this assertion is, and stand before you today as an example of a non-resistant non-believer. I think it would be great if God existed. I really do. I would absolutely love
non-believer
to escape death. I would relish being the recipient of unconditional love. Less selfishly, I would love to be able to worship that which deserves to be worshipped. I just don't think it's true. Now, try as I might, look where I can, I find no response, no hint, nothing. I don't choose to disbelieve in God any more than I choose to disbelieve in aliens, despite how much I might want them to. So when faced with a psalm like Psalm 139, I'm overwhelmed with a sense not of beauty and consolation, but envy and disappointment. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? Where can I go, I should ask in response, to find it? Of course, you cannot know my heart. You can't know if I'm truly as non-resistant as I claim, but I hope that my actions here might betray me. As a Catholic child, I was once an old.
So where can you go? You got to go inside. It's the journey within. I mean, it's not in, what other people are saying. I mean, I think this is a year ago. So this is a year before the conversation that I just saw him have with Rainn Wilson, and a lot of what he just brought up, pretty much all of it, I think is, addressed in the things that we just discussed. So that would be, dang, that was so fast. Like, yeah, he really laid it on thick. Okay, so the hiddenness is essentially what he's discussed so far. Like, I don't think God exists because he's hidden. And that's, again, goes back to the mind's limitation, the fingers limitation, the words limitation to be able to properly describe what it is, and going into an experience-based form of knowing versus let me try to it's the art of not trying. And the paradox of, you know, what he's saying is like, I've been seeking and I have not found, right? Seeking like really implies that effort and that trying, and he's obviously, you know, reading a lot of stuff and thinking a lot about this. The truth, though, if you really want to find God, is you have to stop seeking God. And that's where you really can start on your journey. And what I'm saying, I'm not saying like a belief or disbelief in God. Again, belief doesn't quite get you there. Belief is still in the realm of ideas. Like a belief is actually there, like faith is there due to a lack of experience. If you experience God, you no longer need faith or belief, right? And you certainly don't need thoughts, and you have no doubts, right? Because you have that experience. So his idea, or the guy he's quoting talking about resistance, I mean, that is actually like a spot on word, as good as words can get us to this point. Like, resistance is the key to understanding what God is. Claiming he's non-resistant and saying like, oh, you know, like, I guess you have to take me for my word that, you know, I'm non-resistant. I mean, that's obviously resistance. Like, to not to be truly non-resistant is to surrender your thoughts, surrender your effort. Okay, surrender your beliefs, surrender your doubts, and ultimately surrender yourself, who you are, who you think you are, that incessant self that we just discussed. That is ultimately the barrier. That is the final boss level to get to the point where you can truly understand what God is. The reason that, you know, people like this can't find God is because they're looking outside of themselves, when the reality is God is inside yourself. And ultimately, once you do go past that boss level, after your hero's journey inward, voila, you find God indeed. And it was you all along. Okay. That's how this goes. But what I just said are words. The beauty about this is you gotta do that trick yourself. You gotta go all the way there. Slay your dragons, become a hero, transcend yourself, die before you die. Whatever terminology you want to use, it's all pointing to the same thing. It's that inner journey from where you go from you stop being a seeker and you just start being fully in yourself, fully present in the moment. And when you do reach that state of being, that is akin to oneness. Okay. That is that feeling you get. You've got no issues, you've got no problems, you're just here right now. That is joy. When you love someone, right? Like, that love, that is akin to what God is. And just like love, you know, all his stuff, you know, like you know, like but if you don't believe in love and all these things, and how do you describe love, and, you know, what is love, you know, if you try to, you know, do that through the brain, you're ultimately going to get to the finger point at the moon. You're going to get close, but it's not going to be it. You're going to be able to describe it, but not really feel it, because to feel it, you got to really experience it. And you do have to be in a state of non-resistance for that to happen. So, okay, look, I you know, that's enough of this one here. The pretty much see where he's going to go. He keeps having these quotes and these terms, and well, if you set up this premise, and then therefore this can't be true. He's going to set up premise. I mean, it's an endless game. It's an endless mind game, just like your thoughts flow endlessly. I mean, you could play that game forever. Let's wrap this up. I had one more video, but I think that we've talked about this enough. I mean, I definitely don't expect this to be the last conversation we have about God. I mean, this is ultimately like the big theme. Like, to be honest, when I saw that video of Rainn Wilson, like, I didn't realize that he was going to be quoting such enlightened figures, right? What they touched on is that is it. That's the big enchilada, right? Like, that is what God is, right? And so a lot of times, if we're going to be stuck in our minds and using words, it's easier to kind of take a Buddhist approach and describing what God is not. Therefore, you've kind of eliminated what God isn't. And the theory or the thought is, I think, once it's all the stuff that's been eliminated that isn't God is gone, then what are you left with? Just yourself, just truth, just love. And the way to understand what God is to not try to understand what God is. So let us listen to the song I wrote called God Is. And let's see, I have some lyrics pulled up here. I might have to pull it up again, actually, if I play this.
God has no name. God has no shame. God has not guilt. God has no pain. God has no pride. God is the peace inside. It's the light in your eye. We're all the same. God has no name. It's all between. In what we write, in what we sing, it lives inside. It sees through your eyes. God is the whole. God has no role. Gate is your soul. We're all the same. God has no name. God doesn't judge. There's no sides, no rule to abide. There's not above, there's no below. There's only love. Look deep inside. We're all the same. God has no name. God's not our mind. God's what's behind. Lead with your soul. Go with the flow. There's no control. God does not hide. Life is a ride. We all transcend. That's not the end. We're all the same. God has no name. We're all the same. God has no name.
All right. That is God Is. And of course, it's gets us to God, what God is, by describing what God is not. And what I try to do is think of all the ways in which people try to describe what God is, or justify why they don't believe in God. And I try to put all those reasons and just be like, it ain't that. It ain't that. And then, of course, the chorus is, we're all the same. God has no name. The reason that is, I mean, that's the core message, right? Like when you're able to dissolve yourself, like Rainn Wilson did at the concert, he exists, right? Rainn Wilson didn't exist. He was just vibing, just being. That is, like I said, oneness. That is God. Okay. When there is no distinction, there just is. It's just that steady, constant state of being. And when you're like that, you no longer are seeing distinctions. You're not seeing differences and divides between you or anyone else, because that would defy what oneness is. And that's where the brain struggles. The brain can't comprehend oneness. The brain is just a fragmentation, pattern matching machine, very highly elite, sophisticated machine. But a machine, right? Powered by the impulse of God, consciousness, by the essence, but it is not it. What other ways we just try to describe God is by giving God a name. God is this one, this name, and your God is wrong. Our God is the right one. If your God excludes, then that's an ego-made God. It's not the oneness, the real God, right? So God has no shame. God has no guilt. God has no pain. Okay. So what I'm trying to do is get you to that part of yourself that has no shame, that has no guilt, that has no pain. Okay. Because that's that part of you. That's that consciousness, right? In which your body is a vehicle for. That's that underneath. That's what's behind your thoughts. That's what's behind your mind. Get to feeling that point, that essence, that just pure joy, that love. And then you'll understand what God is. You got to shed the other stuff, shed the bullshit, right? And those things are pillars to a lot of religions. All right. And that's where those mistranslations get us into trouble. God has no pride. God is the peace inside. It's the light in your eye. Okay. So the pride one is, once again, like, my religion is superior. My God is the best God, right? That's ego. That's pride. Okay. And of course, like, just pride in general is like just not good. That's never going to help anything, right? If you're in pride mode, you're far away from God mode. That's a big flag for you to see, like, oh shit, I'm in pride mode. Like, then, you got to get back into yourself somehow. It's all between and what we write and what we sing. It lives inside. It sees through your eyes. So again, it's like the reading between the lines. It's not so much the words that you're able to say, but it's the fact that you can say words, not the thoughts that you think, but the fact that you can think thoughts. All right. It lives inside, it sees through your eyes. Like, your eyes are the eyes of God. All right. These hands are the hands of God. You got to really internalize. You got to internalize what God essence is. You got to feel that essence inside yourself. And that's how you'll be able to kind of start being in it, sitting in it, and experiencing more. God is the whole. God has no role. The gate is your soul. Okay, so that goes back to the oneness, right? God is the whole. Everything. That's what God is. I can't find God, well, I don't see him, right? It's like, you can't not see him, right? What you are doing is actually blinding yourself. You're mistranslating. Your perception is limited, right? Because you're containing it. You're containing it within your insecure, ego, limited knowledge self. All right. God has no role. Like, again, like a lot of these things that we think about, why, let's, like the guy was saying, like, the third point he was going to say is suffering, like, since they're suffering, well, God didn't fill that void. He didn't fill that role. So that's a point to exclude what God is. right? It's like, no, like God has no role. Again, we're getting into anything you put on top of what God is, that's your thing. That's not God's thing. Okay. God doesn't judge. There's no sides, no rules to abide. There's not above, there's no below. There's only love. Obviously, we're kind of getting into like, a little bit of like Christianity doctrine there. Like, like God is the ultimate, like the judge, right? We're talking about the first, was it the Old Testament, right? Like the judge, the one that judges. Like when you yourself are in a state of judging people or judging yourself, you are far away from the God essence. God doesn't judge. God just is. Everything is perfectly fine, right? The judgment we bring into any particular situation or scenario is our response to it. It's our ego's response to it. It's our world building. Everything, again, we're putting it on top of what is. But if we were just to dissolve and just be with the one isness that is, everything would be groovy. No sides. Again, your God sucks. My God's the best. Yeah, yada, 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 right? Rules. Hey, my God has, these rules, I gotta kneel, I gotta do this, I gotta eat this or not that, like all these rules. Like, again, that's all people stuff. And God don't give a shit about that. Again, this idea of above and below, right? This idea of heaven, this idea of hell, right? It all happens in here. Heaven and hell. That's your own making, right? God is everywhere. God is everything. There's only love. Boom. Right? Dispel the rest. Stick to love, stick to joy, and you're going to be able to understand what God is. God's not our mind. God's what's behind. Lead with your soul and go with the flow, right? When we sing it, it's a little different. Lead with your soul, go with the flow. There's no control. So again, God's not our mind. I think I've made that point abundantly clear. Like, and it's where 99% of people are stuck, I'm sure, is in their mind. That's where I was stuck. And I wasn't able to separate myself from my thoughts. And the moment that I was finally able to successfully do that after a couple of like huge traumatic life events and then a successful meditation, that I had, like boom, that separation was clear as day. I mean, there were my thoughts, and then here was I in the background, just chilling, watching the thoughts. And the thoughts would come sometimes with a backpack of emotions. And typically when that thought would come, and I'd just assume that luggage, and I would feel that emotion, and it would just kind of take me for a ride. But then I was able to separate myself and not go along with that and just let it go, let it pass, and realize that that wasn't me. And of course, I've come back into my mind, but my mind isn't driving me anymore. I'm the one driving it. And I get to use it for the beautiful, amazing tool that it is versus it using me. Lead with your soul. Okay. Again, that's what I'm talking about. It's the transcendent part, like the part that's ineffable, right? It's not the descriptive part. It's not the physical part. Go with the flow, right? Like if you truly can practice non-resistance and go with what is, you'll understand what God is. Let go of control, right? Like let go of control. Like that's the incessant self that Rainn Wilson was talking about, that old Persian guy was talking about, like that incessant self. That's what's keeping you behind. Like that's what's restricting you. That's the resistance, right? Is this idea like I need to control things, right? From a survival based mentality. I need to control things, right? And if you realize that, everything is happening for you and being created by you with a much more profound intelligence. And if you want to use the brain, like think more so your subconscious versus your conscious, right? Think about intelligence in a different way, not like, oh, I'm so smart. That's more like cleverness. Intelligence is your heart beating right now. you breathing, right? Your cells multiplying. You don't do that. You don't control that. You don't know how to do that. It does it for you. It's automatic. That's life intelligence. The flower finding the sunlight. It doesn't have a brain. How does it know? That's that deeper intelligence. You tap into that and oh baby, oh Nelly. You understand what God is. God does not hide. Life is a ride. We all transcend. Death's not the end. Again, this like God's hiding. You have to find it. Or no. That's a huge that's wrong. It's misled so many people. Like somehow God is outside of yourself and you got to go and find it, right? God's inside yourself. It ain't hiding. It's you. And it's you whether you realize it or not. It's always going to be you. The trick is to realize it before you die. Because once you die, you're going to, that last breath, you're like, oh, I see. And then boom, right? And if you're able to realize that, so metaphorically, figuratively speaking, die before you die, have that ego death experience before you actually die, then you get to live life with God as the orchestrator of the now new reborn you, the full you, the complete you, the intelligent you, the God you. Life is a ride. We all transcend. We're here just to experience this physical form, like this existence is just a vehicle for the consciousness. We're riding it. We're taking it for a ride. And when this dimension ends, when this physicality ends, we're not really dead. Our essence, I mean, that's what heaven is. That's what eternal life is. Okay. It's the trueness, our essence that precedes the existence. That's why death's not the end. We're all the same. God has no name. We're all the same. God has no name. All right. That's the song. That's the random Wednesday afternoon chat about the big G. I look forward to looking, deeper into both of these people and seeing what other thoughts they have. It's been a fun exploration. Thank you guys for watching this video. I'm Hugo. This is Illuminate. Take care of yourself.